The town of Whispering Creek had always been a place where whispers traveled faster than horses and judgments came quicker than justice. It was a small settlement carved from dust and determination, where everyone knew everyone, though not always well enough to know the truth. That morning, panic stirred when Mr. Dalton, owner of the general store, discovered his prized set of silverware missing, an imported heirloom handed down from his father. Word spread like wildfire. By noon, the accusation had a name, Elena. She was young, no more than 20, with eyes that held a quiet sadness and a posture accustomed to carrying invisible weight. Having arrived in town 6 months earlier, she worked odd jobs, kept to herself, and spoke only when necessary. In a place where belonging was earned through birthright, her silence was interpreted as secrecy. So when the sheriff called for witnesses, the fingers pointed with ease. She was near the store yesterday, claimed Mrs. Harlow, though she'd only seen Elena pass by on her way to the well. She moves like she's hiding something, another muttered. None had seen her steal, but that mattered little. In Whispering Creek, certainty wasn't required, only agreement. The sheriff, Stern Wilson, wasn't a cruel man, but he believed more in order than fairness. Elena stood before him, eyes lowered, surrounded by townsfolk who stared as if she were already convicted. He questioned her patiently. "Where were you last night?" "At the barn behind McCarthy's stables," she answered softly. "I was fixing a broken latch." "Anyone to confirm that?" "No." Her voice carried resignation, not defiance. To the crowd, that was enough. A few murmured about sending her to the territorial prison. Others suggested running her out of town. The more aggressive spoke of public shame. But one man stepped away from the back of the crowd, calm amidst the chaos. Wyatt Carson. A tall, rugged cowboy known more for his quiet strength than his words. Wyatt had arrived only a few weeks prior, buying a large tract of land just outside the town. He rarely engaged in town matters, but something about the proceeding unsettled him. Perhaps it was Elena's stillness, not of guilt, but of someone too tired to defend herself. He cleared his throat and spoke evenly. "Sheriff, if she's under suspicion, she doesn't need a cell, she needs a fair chance to prove otherwise." All eyes turned to him. "I'll take her to my ranch until the hearing. She stay under my watch. If she runs, I'll be responsible." The townsfolk exchanged uneasy glances. Some argued, saying he had no place intervening, especially for someone with no ties. But Wyatt's reputation preceded him. He was a man who rarely spoke unless certain. Elena looked up then, surprised. A stranger was defending her when no one else would. The sheriff hesitated but finally agreed, seeing little risk. As Wyatt approached her, he said gently, "You don't owe them silence if you're innocent." She met his gaze for the first time. Her reply was barely a whisper. "I've spoken before." It didn't change anything. Wyatt nodded, not pressing further. The two walked away, whispers trailing behind them like dust in the wind. Elena felt every stare burn into her back, but also sensed something new: uncertainty. Yes, but also the faintest flicker of hope. Perhaps for the first time in a long while, someone believed she was more than what the world had decided she was. And that was enough to take the first step toward proving it. The ride to Wyatt's ranch was quiet, the air tense with unspoken thoughts. Elena sat rigid on the wagon seat, hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the horizon. Wyatt didn't press her. He understood that trust was not something granted easily, especially by someone who had spent years being watched with suspicion. Instead, he focused on the path, the sun dipping lower as they approached the Carson ranch. The moment the ranch house came into view, a sturdy, two-story structure built from cedar logs and guarded by sprawling pastures, Elena felt the weight of her uncertainty grow heavier. She had never known comfort like this. Homes like his were built on legacy and trust. She had neither. When the wagon halted near the porch, the front door opened before Wyatt could help her down. A woman stepped into view, dressed neatly despite the late hour. Cora Carson, Wyatt's sister-in-law, wore an expression both polite and cold, like winter wrapped in silk. "Another stray?" she asked, tone-clipped. "Or has this one been convicted already?" Wyatt's jaw tightened. "She's here until the hearing. Her name is Elena." Cora's gaze swept over Elena slowly, like evaluating livestock. "We will keep her until then," she said, "but we don't need more trouble here." Her emphasis on more didn't go unnoticed before Wyatt could respond. A teenage boy appeared behind Cora, Finn, lanky and tall for his age, with freckles and eyes that flickered with unease. He glanced at Elena briefly, then looked away, his hand tightening around the porch railing. "Finn," Wyatt called gently. "This is Miss Elena. She'll be staying with us for a while." Finn nodded but kept his head low. Elena noticed the tremor in his fingers, like someone afraid of being found out. It lasted only a moment, but she caught it. A flicker of recognition passed through her. She had lived in fear like that once. Inside, the house felt even more foreign to her warm lighting, polished floors, modest but well-kept furnishings. Everything spoke of stability, something she had never known. Cora showed her a small room near the back. "This will be yours," she said, setting down a folded quilt. "Meals at sundown. We rise before dawn. And until your name is cleared, if it is, you will not wander the property without permission." Elena nodded silently as Cora left. Elena touched the quilt, soft, unfamiliar. Her throat ached unexpectedly. Later that evening, at the dinner table, Wyatt attempted to make conversation. "Elena worked fixing stable latches last night," he said, glancing at Cora as though explaining her presence. "She's skilled with her hands." Cora arched an eyebrow. "Skilled hands can take as easily as they mend." The room fell silent. Elena lowered her gaze. It wasn't the insult that hurt, it was the familiarity of it. Only Finn spoke, voice strangely brittle. "People can make mistakes," he whispered, not looking up. "Sometimes. They don't mean to." Wyatt eyed him, concern etching across his features. "You okay, son?" Finn stiffened. "Fine." Then he stood abruptly and retreated upstairs. Elena watched him go. Something small but sharp stirring inside her. Fear, guilt. She recognized both. That night, as she lay awake in unfamiliar sheets, she heard soft footsteps in the hallway. A whisper. A door closing. Silence. The house was peaceful, but it was not calm. Something was wrong here. And Elena, the very person they accused of dishonesty, could sense it clearer than anyone else. She wasn't the only one hiding something. Not in this house. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through the small window of Elena's room. Despite the quiet of the ranch, sleep had been elusive. She rose before dawn, pulled on her worn boots, and stepped outside. The air was sharp and clean, a contrast to the heaviness settled inside her. She breathed it in like she was afraid it might be her last morning as a free woman. Wyatt was already in the barn, tending to the horses. He glanced up as she approached, but said nothing at first. Then, gently, "You don't have to start work so early." Elena shrugged. "Working is easier than waiting." He nodded in understanding. "If you ever want to tell me anything about yourself, or what happened yesterday, I'm listening." His voice held no accusation, just quiet sincerity. She hesitated, then nodded and began brushing down the mar, finding comfort in the repetitive motion. But the past had claws, and that morning they found her, because once years ago she had stood in another barn in another town. Just like this, surrounded by whispers she didn't deserve. She had been 17. employed as a maid in a mid-range hotel. When money went missing from the guest ledgers, fingers pointed to the girl who had the least power. She remembered standing in the lobby, villagers staring at her like they were staring through her. The hotel manager, a man known for his drinking and debts, insisted she'd be fired immediately. Elena had denied it, her voice shaking. But with no one to defend her, she had fled town before they could decide worse. She never forgot the words spoken as she ran. A woman with no one to vouch for her is guilty whether she stole or not. That day, something in her learned to stay silent. Defending herself had done nothing. People chose the story they wanted, not the truth. Wyatt broke her reverie. Someone told me yesterday that you've been accused before. His tone was gentle but probing. Is that true? She stiffened, but something in his gaze, steady, compassionate, encouraged her. Yes, she whispered. I didn't do it. Just like I didn't steal that silver. Wyatt's jaw tightened. I believe you, he said simply. She blinked at him, startled. Why? Because guilt and shame don't look the way you wear them, he replied. You look like someone who's tired, not someone who's hiding. Nobody had ever said that to her. Her throat tightened. She looked away. That afternoon, Wyatt rode into town, quietly asking about the night of the theft. He found inconsistencies. People who claimed to be at the tavern weren't seen there, timelines shifting. The truth didn't add up. Meanwhile, Elena stayed behind, helping with chores, unsure if she was proving her innocence or earning temporary tolerance. Inside the house, Cora watched her with guarded eyes. There was something complex in the woman's gaze, suspicion laced with something that almost resembled fear. Finn avoided her altogether. He would pass by quickly, his shoulders hunched, his eyes refusing to meet hers. But she noticed a tremor in his hands every time someone mentioned the stolen items. And she saw how he flinched whenever his mother spoke sharply. That evening, Elena overheard Cora speaking to Wyatt on the porch. Whatever you're trying to prove, don't forget, our name is on the line. Protecting her could cost you your standing. Wyatt's answer came firm. I'd rather lose standing than let injustice stand. In her room, Elena closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she wondered what life might look like if someone finally stood beside her instead of against her. But she didn't yet know. The real threat wasn't outside the ranch, it was living inside it. Wyatt rode out before sunrise the next day. The reins loosened his hands in a deep furrow between his brows. Trusting his gut had kept him alive on long cattle drives and quiet nights beneath the stars. And today, that instinct told him something was terribly wrong, not with Elena, but somewhere much closer to home. Meanwhile, Elena remained at the ranch, helping with morning chores. Cora assigned her simple tasks, gathering eggs, sweeping the back porch, but there was no warmth in her instructions. Everything was spoken with precision, as if spoken too gently would invite attachment. Elena followed silently, avoiding conflict, but she couldn't ignore the way Cora watched her. Not with disdain now, with worry, and that unsettled her more. Finn came out late, dark circles beneath his eyes and movement stiff like he was bracing against an unseen blow. Elena offered him a quiet good morning. He flinched before responding, voice hollow. Morning. He dropped feed into the trough too fast, spilling some. Cora frowned. Careful, she scolded sharply. Finn recoiled, his hands shaking slightly. Elena noticed and gently moved toward him, but he stepped back. Avoided her. There was fear in that boy. A deep one. Wyatt's investigation began with conversations that seemed casual but were anything but. He spoke with neighbors, workers near the storage barn, even the tavern keeper. And as he pieced timeline fragments together, he found unsettling patterns. More than one home had reported missing items in the past few months. Small things first, coins, trinkets, but then livestock tools, even a revolver. No one had thought them connected. Until now. And every incident occurred within a radius that placed his ranch at the center. Wyatt's mind returned to Finn's tremors, to Cora's sharpness, to Elena's whispered observation from the night before. He avoids looking at the house when theft is mentioned. Not at her. At the house. At someone inside it. Back at the ranch that afternoon, Elena was washing dishes when she overheard quiet voices near the open window, the stable hands talking. "She didn't do it," one murmured. "I'd swear it. That boy, though. He's been jumpy, ain't he?" "Careful," the other replied. "That boy's under Carson's roof." "Yeah, and maybe that's exactly why no one's looking closer." Elena froze, water dripping from her fingers. She didn't want to believe it. Finn was barely more than a child. But her past reminded her that desperation makes people do things they never imagined. That evening, Wyatt returned. He looked worn but determined. Over dinner, he watched Finn closely. "Son," he said gently, "anything you want to tell me?" Finn's fork clattered against his plate. He stared at Wyatt, eyes widening, then looked immediately to Cora, who went rigid. "Leave him be," she said quickly. Too quickly. Wyatt's gaze sharpened. "I'm not accusing. I'm asking." Elena remained quiet, but her heart beat hard. She saw Finn's lips part like he wanted to speak, then close again. His hands clenched. Then, as silence pressed tighter around the table, Finn whispered, "Can I go to bed?" Wyatt nodded. The boy stood and left without eating. Wyatt turned to Elena as Cora excused herself. "You heard something last night," he said quietly. "Didn't you?" Elena nodded slowly. "He was outside. With someone. I only caught a glimpse. And coins." "I heard coins." Wyatt leaned back, eyes darkening. "Tomorrow I set a trap," he said, voice low. Because sometimes instinct didn't just warn, it pointed directly to the truth. And now, Wyatt was ready to follow it, even if it led straight into the heart of his own home. The night Wyatt set the trap, the sky hung low with heavy clouds, and silence laid across the ranch like a blanket stretched too tight. The plan was simple: leave something valuable in plain sight, make it appear unguarded, and remain hidden to see who came for it. It was risky, painfully so, because it required Wyatt to accept that the person he was tracking might be someone under his very roof. But instinct, as rugged and relentless as the land he rode, told him the truth was closer than he wanted to believe. Inside his office, Wyatt placed a small pouch of coins in the top drawer of his wooden desk and left it slightly ajar. It wasn't much, but enough temptation for someone already desperate. To ensure the setting looked convincing, he spoke loudly about leaving before dawn to meet the sheriff regarding Elena's hearing. Elena, watching from the barn entrance, understood immediately what he was doing. "You think it'll work?" she asked. Wyatt met her gaze through the dim lantern light. "If someone's been watching me closely enough to fear discovery," he said, "they'll move tonight." "Even if it's someone you care about?" she asked softly. His jaw tightened. "Especially then." There was nothing more to say. Wyatt didn't leave. Instead, he hid in the shadowed corridor behind his office, where he could see through a crack in the door. Elena stayed near the barn to give the impression that both were gone, her eyes fixed on the windows. Heart pounding harder with every passing minute. It was almost midnight when the house creaked. Soft footsteps. Careful, hesitant. Not an intruder's stride, someone who knew the floors and feared them equally. The doorknob turned slowly. Wyatt held his breath. Finn stepped inside. The boy's face was pale, eyes red-rimmed as if from unshed tears or sleepless nights. His hands trembled as he approached the desk. He stared at the drawer for a long moment, shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, he whispered to the silence. I have to. He reached in and took the coins. Wyatt stepped forward quietly. Finn! The boy froze. Slowly Finn turned. Tears spilled over his cheeks. I wasn't going to run, he said shakily. I just needed one more payment. After that, he said he'd leave us alone. Elena stepped into the doorway then, silent, watching with eyes full of sadness. Wyatt approached slowly, kneeling to meet Finn at eye level. Who? He asked gently. Finn hesitated, then choked out the name. Jesse Miller. A gambler from town, known for loaning money at brutal interest. Ma borrowed to cover Pa's hospital bills before he passed. She couldn't repay it. He threatened to expose her debts, make us lose the ranch. She told me not to tell you. I thought, if I helped, it'd protect her. Wyatt closed his eyes briefly. Cora, covering her shame with silence and letting another suffer in her place. Elena stepped forward. You were just trying to save your family, she said softly. But wrong doesn't become right because it's done out of fear. Finn sobbed harder. Wyatt put a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. You'll make this right, he said, voice firm yet gentle. But you won't do it alone. A door creaked. Cora stood in the hallway, her face pale as linen. It was time. No more secrets. No more silent blame. The truth had finally stepped into the light, and Elena, the woman they called a thief, was the one who witnessed it all. Morning came with little warmth. Gray skies hung over Whispering Creek as if the weather itself hesitated to judge what had unfolded the night before. Wyatt stood on the porch, eyes heavy but resolute. Finn sat at the table inside, silent and pale, while Cora remained upstairs, her door closed. Elena, dressed and ready, watched Wyatt from a distance. Today, the truth would be brought to light. And for the first time since her accusation, she did not feel like she was walking toward her own sentencing. She felt like she was walking toward freedom. Wyatt hitched the wagon, motioning for Finn to join him. The boy hesitated. I'm scared, he admitted quietly. Wyatt's response was steady. Courage doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you walk forward anyway. Elena stepped toward Finn and offered a folded handkerchief. You don't have to speak loudly, she said softly. Just honestly. Finn nodded, eyes glistening. He took it and climbed aboard. The ride into town was slow, the wheels crunching against dry earth. People were already gathered near the sheriff's office by the time they arrived. Curious about the scheduled hearing for Elena, she braced herself, expecting glares, maybe even hatred. But Wyatt didn't take her toward the sheriff first. He took Finn. Inside the office, Sheriff Wilson looked up in surprise. Carson, I thought you were coming to speak on her behalf. I still am, Wyatt said, but not the way you expected. Finn stood beside him, trembling. I was the one who took the silver, he said in a halting voice. And other things. I was trying to pay off a debt to Jesse Miller, to protect my mother. The sheriff blinked, stunned. You're confessing to theft? Finn nodded, tears slipping silently. Sheriff Wilson leaned back slowly. Then I'm officially clearing Miss Elena of all accusations. He looked to her. You're free to go. It should have felt like relief. Instead, Elena felt hollow. Because even though she was free in word, she knew the stain of accusation would not wash away in a single sentence. Wyatt stood tall beside her. This isn't enough, he said firmly. She deserves apologies. The sheriff nodded, then stepped outside with Wyatt, Finn, and Elena following. The crowd looked expectantly until the sheriff cleared his throat and announced, Miss Elena is innocent. She never stole a thing. The boy has confessed. A ripple of disbelief passed through the crowd. Then shame. The shopkeeper, Mr. Dalton, stepped forward. Miss Elena, he began awkwardly, I I'm sorry. We were wrong. His wife lowered her head. Mrs. Harlow, who had spoken against Elena so vocally, wrung her hands. Sometimes fear makes us, Elena interrupted gently. Fear didn't accuse me. Assumptions did. Silence fell. Wyatt placed a hand lightly on her arm in quiet support. Several more townsfolk murmured apologies. Some looked away, unable to meet her eyes. But Elena didn't need them all to look at her. Only one did. A little girl, no more than 8, stepped forward holding a small flower. I never thought you did it, she whispered. You helped me find my doll when I lost it. Thieves don't help people. Elena's eyes stung. She took the flower. Wyatt spoke then, voice carrying across the square. Let this be a lesson: truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it barely whispers. But if you listen close enough, you'll hear it. As the crowd dispersed, Elena looked at Wyatt. Thank you, she whispered. He met her gaze softly. I didn't clear your name, he said. You did that yourself by never lowering your eyes. For the first time in a long time, Elena lifted her chin. She was no longer the girl accused. She was the woman vindicated. The ride back to the ranch was quieter than the journey into town. Not with fear this time, but with the kind of quiet that follows a storm, the air still tense, but something lighter lingering beneath it. Elena sat beside Wyatt, hands folded gently in her lap, staring ahead. Finn rode in the back, shoulders hunched, but not with secrecy, now only remorse. The truth had been spoken. But truth alone doesn't mend damage. Healing does. As the ranch house came into view, Cora stood on the porch, eyes fixed on them. She looked smaller than usual, not diminished by shame alone, but by the collapse of the image she'd worked so hard to uphold. When Finn stepped down from the wagon, she rushed forward and pulled him into her arms. I'm so sorry, she whispered, voice breaking. This is my fault. Finn clung to her. No, he said. I did it. No, Wyatt interjected firmly but gently. What you did came from trying to protect family. What's fault is letting pride weigh heavier than honesty. He looked directly at Cora. You should have trusted us. Tears filled her eyes. She nodded slowly. Then she turned to Elena. There was no defiance left in her face, only regret. I judged you, Cora said quietly. Not because I believed you guilty, but because I was afraid someone would look too closely at my own house. I'm sorry, truly. Elena swallowed hard. She could feel the honesty in Cora's words, raw and unpolished. I understand, she replied softly. Fear makes people do things silence cannot forgive, but acknowledging it is the first step toward changing it. Cora nodded, tears slipping. I hope someday you'll trust us enough to forgive. Elena didn't promise forgiveness, but she offered something more meaningful, her hand. Cora took it, a hint of relief passing between them. The days that followed were slow but quietly transforming. Finn began working with Wyatt at the stables, repaying what he had stolen. He worked hard, often silently, but with a determination that spoke of wanting to reclaim more than coins, his honor. Cora, once rigid and composed, started spending mornings helping Elena with household duties. Their conversations were few, their pace gradual. But something softened in the way Cora listened. And Elena, once accustomed only to keeping distance, began to speak of small things, her childhood memories of sewing by lantern light, how horses calm her, and how silence was not always her choice but her refuge. Wyatt watched the shift quietly, never pushing, simply being present. He spent evenings repairing a broken fence with Finn and mornings riding out with Elena to inspect the land. Their exchanges were minimal at first, weather observations, livestock notes, but slowly warmth replaced formality. One evening, as they walked past the edge of the pasture, Elena paused, looking out over the setting sun. I thought leaving would be the only way to feel free, she said quietly. But maybe staying is what being free truly means. Wyatt stopped beside her. Sometimes, he said, running protects you. But healing only happens when you finally stop. She looked at him then, not with guarded eyes, but with emerging trust. I'm tired of running. He nodded. Then don't. They stood in silence, watching the sun descend, shadows lengthening but no longer threatening. For the first time, Elena felt the land beneath her feet not as temporary ground, but as home beginning to form. Not from walls or property, but from honesty, earned respect, and the quiet safety of someone who believed in her before she believed in herself. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows over the ranch, when silence swept across the courtyard like the moment before a storm. Everyone stood tense, the ranch hands, the sheriff, the townsfolk who had so quickly condemned Abigail as a thief weeks ago. Now they watched with shame and uneasy curiosity as Caleb, the cowboy who had believed in her when no one else did, faced off against his own cousin. Jasper, the real criminal who had been living under his roof. Jasper stood with wrists bound. Dirt smeared across his face, but his eyes still held that sly glint, the same one Abigail had seen the night she was wrongly accused. He tried one last attempt at manipulation. Come on, Caleb. You're really going to choose her over family? His voice was sharp, bitter. She's just some girl you barely know. Caleb stepped forward, his jaw tight. She's more honest than you've ever been. Blood doesn't make someone family honor does. His voice carried, firm and unwavering. Abigail stood a few steps behind, her heart pounding, not with fear this time, but with an overwhelming sense of vindication. She had endured humiliation, whispers, and sleepless nights. Now, the truth was finally standing in the light. The sheriff approached Jasper. You'll answer for every theft, every lie. As Jasper was escorted away, he spat back, You'll regret this, Caleb. But the cowboy didn't flinch. Instead, he turned to the gathered crowd. Many lowered their eyes, unwilling to meet his gaze, especially those who had insulted Abigail, called her a criminal, a gold digger, a stray. Old Mrs. Fletcher, who had loudly demanded Abigail be removed from town, walked forward slowly. Her voice trembling, she offered Abigail a folded handkerchief. I am sorry, dear. I was wrong. Abigail accepted it gently, but she didn't smile. Not yet. Forgiveness would take time. As the townspeople began dispersing, Caleb stepped closer, his presence a comforting shield. You don't have to stay here anymore, he said quietly. But I hope you do. Not because you're forced to, not because you owe me anything, but because this ranch, this life could be yours if you want it. She looked at the sprawling land, the golden horizon, then back to him. I came here to escape my past, she whispered. But somewhere along the way, I found something worth staying for. Caleb's gaze softened. Then stay. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic embrace, just two people standing in the fading light, understanding that trust, once broken and rebuilt, is stronger than before. She nodded, slowly at first, then with conviction. I'll stay. Later that night, sitting on the porch, Abigail watched the stars shimmer. The air was quiet, peaceful, the kind of quiet that comes after a long-fought storm. Caleb walked out and sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees. You were braver than anyone today, he murmured. She shook her head. No, I just refused to let fear define me. He looked at her with something deeper than admiration. That's what makes you strong. Abigail leaned back, gazing at the sky. For the first time, the world didn't feel heavy. The same town that once marked her as a thief now knew her truth. And beside her sat the man who didn't just clear her name, he gave her back her dignity. The wind rustled softly around them. She smiled, not because the story was over, but because it was finally starting.